After we have enjoyed our morning session and got a good framing of what disruption means in TVET, we now move on to our Plenary 2, which is called Managing the Effect of Disruptions Through Improved Governance of TVET System, and the objective is to address the country responses and initiatives that seek to improve governance to manage the effects of the disruptions. For that, we have a panel of Denise Amiot of Colleges and Institutes Canada, CICAN, Oliver Charles Ossou from Côte d'Ivoire, Fédération Ivoirienne des Petites et Moyennes Entreprises, and Oliver Deal from the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, BMBF. And the panel will be moderated by Pradeep Mona, Deputy Executive Secretary of UNCCD. With that, I would like to hand over, if we're ready. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to Bonn, since I'm based in Bonn, especially colleagues who have come from far places. My name is Pradeep Mona. I'm Deputy Executive Secretary for United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Just to give you a background about this convention, in 1992, 3 Rio Conventions were made or adopted: climate change, biodiversity, land degradation, and desertification. And this 3rd convention is basically for poor communities, poor countries, especially dealing with poverty issues. Why I'm saying so? Because land is the most finite thing in this world. We do whatever we do, land is finite. And unfortunately for us, 25% of total land area is degraded land, almost 2 billion hectares. And out of which 500 million hectares is a productive agricultural land that has become degraded over the last few decades. When I was invited to moderate this session, I asked my colleague Shamal, why are you asking me to moderate this session? Because when you talk about disruptions, you are talking about digital disruption, climate disruption, migration, demographic disruption. And his answers were, and which I quote, Pradeep, in UN system, and I'm sure at the country level also, we deal with development agenda in a very fragmented way. That's a challenge. In different ministries, different agencies, even for 3 Rio conventions which deal with environment and development, we have 3 focal points in each country. Climate focal point, don't talk to biodiversity focal point that closely, and of course land degradation is a different focal point. How do we connect the dots in UN system? But then, how do we connect the dots? What we want to achieve, sustainable development goals, 17 all, and of course climate action on the ground. So I find it's my really privilege to be part of this very important session, which is focusing on managing the effect of disruptions through improved governance of technical and vocational education and training program. And just before coming here over lunch, we were discussing with all 3 very eminent panelists present here why we are using the word disruption. And I was quoting in the morning, one of the opening remarks were made is, disruption is a change. Could it be an opportunity or a threat? And this session will look at how we can use this disruption happening at the global level as an opportunity. Before going to this eminent panelist, let me also give you a slightly global context from our perspective, how we are trying to look at TVET program in overall conceptual framework within UN system or at the country level. Let me give you a very specific example. India. I was in India a couple of weeks earlier, talking to a number of ministries being coordinated by Niti Aayog, which is Planning Commission of India. I give you simple statistics. India occupies 2.5% of total land area of the world, 18% population. 18% of world population lives in India. And out of this 2.5% of land area, 1/3, 30% land area is degraded land, almost 100 million hectares. If total land area of India is 320 million hectares. Put it in the right context. We are talking about 100 million hectares of land which is degraded. If we try to reclaim that, make it land restoration, what it means for food security, water, energy, and ecosystem restoration, but most importantly, jobs. As per the latest indication, if we invest in 10 hectares, make it productive, 2 jobs are created as a part of value chain approach. So for India, we are trying to look at 10% of land reclaimed in the next 5 years. We are talking about 2 million jobs being created out of, and 2 million jobs. What are we talking here? They'll be mostly in rural areas, because those are the areas where the agriculture will be prime approach. What kind of skills we require? What kind of vocational training we require for people living in those areas, where they can use that opportunity to have fruitful occupation, and of course, then going for sustainable land management. Another example, when we look at sustainable development goals, while SDG 4 looks at education per se, SDG 15, sustainable goal 15, looks at life on land. And here we are talking about land degradation neutrality. That 12 million hectares of land that is getting degraded every year as I speak, how we can neutralize it to begin with. Let's not talk about the 2 billion hectares which is already degraded. Let us stop degradation now. And that becomes very relevant when we talk about many countries, especially in Africa. If you just reflect, one of the disruption mentioned in the background note is migration and demographic changes. In UN system we looked at, and I'm sure many of you coming from Europe and of course from Africa, 2 to 3 million people have migrated to Europe in the last 2 to 3 years for various reasons. Security, safety, sustainability, but also due to the fact that many of these countries had long-term droughts, and of course they had to leave their dwellings to move into more where they can have more economic opportunities. But that 3 million people migrating to Europe, including Germany, it has changed political landscape in Europe completely. Social fabrics, integration. And when we talk about integration, nothing else becomes more important, like we heard First Lady in the morning or Chief Guest today. Integration means empowering people. And empowerment for those people starts with vocational training, technical training. And that's where TVET program becomes very relevant. But here also a cause of concern in UN system. A latest study we have done with NATO recently shows that if Sahel region and sub-Saharan region, if we don't invest in making land productive there, people will move. And with demographic changes, if present trends continue, by 2040, 2050, 40 to 50 million young people will be standing on the shore of North Africa to cross over to Europe. That's reality. Trends are very clear. It means if you want to invest and make them people where they are as of now, it's time. And there, while we have to look at sustainable land management, sustainable agriculture practices, agroforestries, water conservation, food security, safety, but most importantly to empower those people, especially in skills and knowledge, dealing with those issues. And that's where TVET program can play a very important role. And there's a very clear linkage between land, jobs, and skills. And that's why I was very happy when I was offered this opportunity, and I would like to thank my colleagues in UNESCO and especially Shamil Majumdar for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on that, and how in UN system we are trying to link those dots, trying to find solutions. Because when we talk about countries, they want solutions. They don't want intervention in 1 or 2 areas. Yes, they want the specific areas, but on the other hand, they want solutions to their unemployment. They want solutions to their food security. They want solutions to their livelihood options what they have. And this is where I feel very encouraged to be part of such movement and such global forum, learning forum being organized here, where we can learn from each other, especially from eminent panelists present here, but also I understand number of very good participants coming from different parts of the world, sharing their knowledge and their experiences here. We have 3 eminent panelists today with me. First, one of the first panelists, Denise Emu from Colleges Institute Canada. She will focus on institutional approach when we talk about country-level responses and initiatives that seek to improve governance to manage effects of disruptions. And of course, how we link up to 2030 Development Agenda, and of course, link it to climate action also. And here, she will share with us policy and capacity building approaches in TVET colleges to advance the green agenda in Canada. And when we mention about such examples, we call them best practice models. Although one solution doesn't fit all countries, every country must adopt to local conditions. But such best practices model help us to understand how we can really replicate them and then scale up in the local context in different parts of the world. The second presentation, again, from my colleague from Ivory Coast, Olivier Usu. He will deal with role of the private sector, especially contribution of the private sector in TVET systems and institutional governance. And of course, third presenter is our colleague, Oliver Deal from Federal Ministry of Education Research, Germany, and he'll focus on the role of the government, especially taking Germany as specific examples, where he's focusing on disruptions and healing, state of the migration challenge in the German TVET system. So we'll have 3 good presentations covering on institutional framework, private sector, and public sector, the government. We'll have around 90 minutes, and each presenter I have requested to take 10 to 15 minutes to give a good presentation, raise questions. Especially, I will request them to focus, how do we take this disruption as an opportunity or a threat? And perhaps I will also look forward to all participants present here to raise questions, making comments on their presentations, and whether they can really see we can further raise the bar by really coming up with a clear outcome from this session, which I believe is very important, linking institutional, private sector and public sector approaches to really improve the governance system of TVET program. For these words, let me again extend a very warm welcome to all of you to this second plenary session, which I feel is very important, focusing on the fundamentals of governance issues, which becomes, in my view, the most important, the foundation stone to really manage the effects of disruptions, and of course to contribute to global 2030 sustainable agenda. So with these words, let me now request our first presenter, Denise, to take the floor and give her presentation. Floor is yours.
Bonjour. Good afternoon. Buenos tardes. Ni hao. Guten Tag. That's about what I can manage. Ma présentation va être en français, alors je suis désolée pour ceux d'entre vous.
I'm really sorry. My presentation is going to be in French. Sorry, no, it's going to be in English. Well, for the French-speaking participants, I'm really sorry. My presentation is going to be in English, but if you would like to have a copy, I'll be very happy to send it.
So no need to worry. So thank you very much first for this invitations. I'm very, very pleased to be here. My first time in Bonn. I love it. I just want to come back. I have to say that for me to be invited to talk about what we do in the college system with respect to the greening of TVET, I will say TVET. I have to say that in my country we have stopped using the expression TVET 30 years ago. We call it Professional and Technical Education and Training, and I could explain to you why in the question period if you want. So I'll try to make sure that I say TVET, because we're really not used to say this. But it's a real pleasure to be able to talk about these subjects, because it is something that is very close to my personal heart, but also I'm a biologist, I'm an ecologist in fact, and but it's also important for our country. We have a new government now, and for whom climate change, whatever is related to climate change, is very, very important. And so when I come to talk with you, I come as the president of a national association of all the colleges, the polytechnics, and the cégeps in the country. And I should say that we are, you remember when Boren made the presentations about the 6 types of governance in TVET, I'm number 6, because we do not have federal governance in education. It is of provincial and territorial jurisdiction. That said, we are the only country in the world without a national ministry of education. There's only the penguins that don't have a national ministry of education in Antarctica. So today I will give you numerous examples of what post-secondary institutions are doing in Canada to respond to the challenge of climate change, while supporting a growing green economy. I have to say, and I guess this could be the summary of my presentation, whenever we talk about green TVET, in fact it's a way of thinking, it's a way of being, and it's a way of doing. So what I will talk about, I could have talked about it for 2 days, but I'm asked to talk about it for 15 minutes. So the first thing that I will say is that and I'm using the framework that Mr. Majumdar has presented to us yesterday, in fact. And I have to say, if UNESCO-UNEVOC would not exist, I'm not sure we would have used that framework. And yes, we have been doing things in those 5 areas, but it's very useful to be able to use a framework in order to explain what we do. In those 5 dimensions. The first thing I would like to say, though, is that in 1992, so that's quite a few years ago, my association at the time was called the Association of Canadian Community Colleges, and we worked with what we call the National Table on the Environment and the Economy, and we developed, guess what, a green guide. In 1992, we developed a green guide that was a user's guide for sustainable development in the Canadian colleges. So we've been at that for a long time. Then in 1998, there was a big movement in Canada to have what we call sustainable campuses. And the movement was led, in fact, by students. And this has not stopped growing. Then, in 2007, my association developed what we call the Pan-Canadian Protocol on Sustainability. It was voluntary, people could sign it, and it was basically the what and how to do sustainable development in your colleges, and it was quite popular. And the summary of that protocol was to say that it was the whole institution. It was a way of thinking, a way of doing, a way of being. Then in 2012, there was what we call the Creations of Sustainability and Education's Policy Network, and this was a group that put together researchers and organizations, again, to advance sustainability in education, in policy, and in practices. So what is interesting, you'll see I will have examples for each of those. And all that to say is that this is not new. And those, when you look at the 5 dimensions, sometimes people may think that they are separate, they are like silos. But in fact, they are very much interdependent and interconnected. So much that when I was identifying examples, I thought, oh, I could fit this one here. And so I really tried to look at what was the main trait of each of those. So let's see, the first one is about the Green Campus. I told you about this initiative in 1998, so that's what? 2008, 2018, ça fait 30 ans déjà, that was led by students. So this has really transformed all our campuses in the country. But I thought I would use the approach, one example, which is Cégep de Limoilou. It's a Cégep in Quebec. And what they did, instead of just doing, you know, the low-hanging fruit, reducing your waste, trying to make sure that you don't put the air conditioning too high so that people put sweater in the summer. So what they did, they literally looked at systemic changes throughout their entire campus. And they look at facilities management, they looked at the campus operations, and they looked at how they could have also approaches with the communities around them to do partnerships. And this includes commuting, because that's a big aspect for students when they have to go from one place to the other. And it meant green campuses mean to integrate everything from what's happening in student life, what's happening with respect to faculty, as well as community service. This campus, Cégep de Limoilou, in fact, got an international award from the World Federations of Colleges and Polytechnics in Brazil in 2016 for their approach with green campuses. So, of course, yes, they have beekeeping on campus. They have a green roof, but they have many, many aspects. So when you go into the campus, you feel it's green. And I have to say, when you go in a number of campuses across Canada, you also feel this emphasis on sustainability. And this idea of the green campuses, in fact, was also exported by some campuses like Dawson College, exported that in Mexico, because this is also something that our campuses are doing. They are doing a lot of international development, so whatever they do in Canada, they also bring that expertise and that know-how to other countries. So the next one, next one is green curriculum. So this gives you a scope and an example of the variety of programs that are offered, that are linked and have the word greening or renewable energy and all that. But we all know that, in fact, when you talk about green curriculum, it is not only about skills in the programs that teach about renewable energy or that teach about conservation, but it is in all aspects of what is taught. Whether you teach culinary arts, you will teach about ensuring that whatever leftover of food is reused. You will do soap with the grease that comes from the food. So you will instill in your students a way of thinking. So if you teach about construction, they will also know about how to ensure that they think in a sustainable way. So, and this is something very, very important. And too often, people limit it to the programs, those programs that I have there. So if there's a second thing to remember from this session is really when we talked about greening the curriculum, it is not only about the programs that are linked to sustainable development, but it is to think about every single program that you teach in your organization, and do we teach about sustainable development, from healthcare to construction to art. Next one. This one is a very interesting one. You remember the first one, green campuses, second one, green curriculum, third one is about green curriculum. So I think it was yesterday, for those of you that were at the network session, there was a fellow, I'm sorry I missed his name, but from Uganda. I don't know if he is here still. Yes, okay, and you talked about teacher training. You talked about the fact that it is an issue right now, teacher training, and you're right. Teacher training is an issue all around the world. So, I thought I would give you this example today. Nova Scotia Community College, you know what they did? It is compulsory for anybody working in that college with students to take a 39 hours of training that lasts a full week. And it's all about how will you green whatever you teach to students. 5 days, compulsory for anybody that wants to teach there. And this includes the professional support staff, because of course your professional support staff will need to support your staff. Compulsory. So imagine the impact that this has on an organization or on an institutions like that. So it means that it is part of the values, it's part of the strategic plan of this institution. So I think it was today that someone talked about the green learning. Oh no, it was yesterday with Majumdar when he talked about the green learning outcomes. So this is a way to ensure that your learning outcomes will all be about sustainable development. So this was for green curriculum. Next one, you remember, the fourth pillar, the fourth dimension. This one is about the green community. This is one example. I could have taken other example, but this one is Durham College in Ontario. And basically, what they're doing, as you know, colleges and polytechnics, they work very, very closely with their community. They work closely with the industry, they work closely with their local environment to ensure that they serve them well. And so what is happening is that they ensure that their work with the community also has a sustainability lens, because they feel that we're not only here to educate the students, but we're here to support the community around us, so that they begin to think also sustainable development, so that it's not only something that it is for those people that are on in our classroom. I could have given you another example in Yukon College, where they are integrating whatever is from the indigenous community in the sustainability approach. Okanagan College that created a garden of medicinal plants with the knowledge of the indigenous communities that have helped them. So this is an example of how whatever is happening in the community is also influenced by what's happening in the college, and what's happening in the college influences what is happening in sustainable development. If I recall well, it is that college, at one point they had a meeting of everybody that had a lot of waste. Imagine, you have a meeting with stakeholders in your community, and it's to talk about who has a lot of waste. When they finished the meeting, there was partnership between people that were able to use some of the waste of one of the stakeholders and vice versa. So the waste of one began to be the goods from almost a procurement perspective, but at no cost, began to be useful for the others. And there was some entrepreneur that began to listen to that and said, hey, I see some business opportunities in that. So that gives you another example. The next one is green research. In Canada, we do a lot of applied research. I know it is not common to do research in TVET. In Canada, we're well known for our applied research. We even have a leadership institute on how to do applied research. And this is an example of how many research centers exist in the country that are linked to sustainable development. And the type of applied research that we do is all about helping to solve a problem of the industry. I'll just give you a quick example because it's linked with waste. Small island, Prince Edward Island. There was a guy that was selling blueberry juice. On an island, it's a problem to have waste. And he had a lot of waste from his blueberry. He had his juice, so he said, he knocked on the door of the college, what do I do with all my waste? Students analyze the waste. More minerals and vitamins in the waste than in the juice. Oh, and the guy said, okay, so what do I do? That college is a college expert that has expertise in food, so they develop recipes until they found a good one. Now the man is selling 7 products, 6 from his waste. When the lobster guy heard about that, he said, hey, I have waste too because I put lobster in can. So what can I do with the shell? Now, the guy sells a patty that you put on crackers that has no lobster in it. But it tastes like lobster. It has the color of lobster. So this is prime example of the type of research that is being done at the college system with an eye from a sustainable development point of view, where you solve the problems that the industry has, and at the same time you create goods because you create jobs and you practice the skills of the students, creativity, critical thinking, entrepreneurship, and so on. Next one, green research. This is another example. SATE, all linked to renewable energy, where the students look exactly at what's happening real time with respect to energy consumption, and they can affect and influence the architecture and the design of what's happening. Next example, and I'm almost done, green culture. This is another example. This one is from Fleming College. It's a Center for Alternative Waste Water Treatment. And because that college think about sustainable development all the time, across curriculum, across the student experience, they are looking at how can we put together what we do in applied research, in learning, as well as in program delivery and in continuing education, so that when we do upskilling for people that come back, we can use our center for all those aspects. So, and this morning I read on my iPhone that Mohawk College, in fact, just helped to set a new standard for green building innovation, which is with a zero carbon building design certification. So it was just announced today. So this gives you an example when the culture, the values, everything that you do is influence the staff, influence what's happening when you build, it influence your waste and so on. So I told you that our current government is very interested in everything that is green and about sustainable development. So we developed, we commissioned, in fact, a report that is called Green Skills for Sustainable Economic Growth. You would have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of each of the category that I have talked about, and we have used the UNESCO-UNEVOC framework in order to present it. So I do invite you, if you are interested in downloading it. It's very, very comprehensive. And the last thing I could not talk about, I'm on the board of the World Federation of Colleges and Polytechnics, and if you are interested in sustainable development or in green skills, we have an affinity group, in fact, that look after everything about sustainable development, greening campus, greening curriculum. So if you're interested, come to see me, and I would be pleased to put you in touch with the group. And because at the World Federation we also have international awards that we give every 2 years, so you will be able to see, if you go on the website, to see who are the 3 winners of the Green Awards of this year that will be announced in Australia. And in fact, one of them, I think, is in the room also, but we cannot say if it's gold, silver, or bronze. So at the end of the day, so that's the affinity group. So if you have questions, don't hesitate. I think I would like to conclude by saying that when you begin to think about green TVET, or greening curriculum, or greening research, or green campuses, at the end of the day, it means that every single job and everything you do is green. Merci.
Thank you very much, Denise, for very inspiring presentation on dimensions of greening TVET. Thank you so much. Now, I have a pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Olivier Poussou, who is from Ivory Coast. He has been involved in reforming TVET system in the Ivory Coast through the Enterprise School Partnership Development Unit, the private sector focal point for mobilizing professionals. So we heard from a very good example from Canada. Now we are moving towards Africa, where he will give us his point of view of involving private sector in making the greening the skills and of course vocational program. Floor is yours. May I request you to limit to 15 minutes, okay, because we would like to finish up our third one also on time, and we have some time for question answers. So,
OK.
floor is yours. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Modérateur. Alors, je vais m'exprimer.
Thank you, facilitator. So I would like to speak in French, and I hope that the message will also come through. So before starting, I would like to thank those who have taken the initiative. That means UNESCO-UNEVOC, and at the same time say that Ivory Coast, for those who know about it, we're a development country, so this helps you to understand certain aspects of my presentation. And a friend of mine talked to me about the public system that comprised 2 school years. It's not obvious because after apprenticeship, you go for a training, and having another opportunity to go to school for 2 years, this is something special. And this young guy underwent it, and the professor asked him to reveal the entire process, and he explained the process that he'd learned about the enterprise. And at the end of the day, the professor learned from it. So luckily, some years later, he went for an enterprise training on the job, and he realized that this pupil was right. So this means that we're trying to come up with a mix of private and public partnerships in professional education, vocational education in Ivory Coast, and this is how we are reforming our vocational training. And my presentation focalizes on these 3 pillars: the foundation of the public-private partnership and its advantages, the private sector in the new governance of EFTP, and what were the pitfalls and challenges. So we're talking about changes here, about disruptions, and in Western Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, we have very young populations. More than 77% of the population are younger than 35 years, and just 63% are between 14 and 25 years old. And these are the people who need to be trained, and introducing the TVET system meant that quite frequently the private sector didn't provide what was needed on the training market. And since 2009, we reformed the vocational training and technical training in order to give more put more focus on the private sector, and we laid out a partnership agreement that was then founded. And what was the focus of this partnership? It was a change of paradigm. In the beginning, everything was being done in a lab, let's say in a state institution. And those who were implied didn't always know about the needs of enterprises, and then it was important that the private sector was implied, and meaning all questions concerning skills, curricula, training, retaining of employees were in line with the private sector. And then we incorporated some bodies. And, for example, we had a joint steering committee, which is a political body comprising, on one hand, the Minister for Vocational Training, and then the private sector representatives, and Then we had the Reform Implementation Committee, that means the Executive Secretariat, and then the private sector needed to be more implied, and this is why we set up a school enterprise partnership unit, and I'm part of it. I'm saying that because this body has evolved and developed, because it was a body that comprised the different enterprises and the consulates, and mobilized the entire private sector in order to participate in this reform. But before, our interests were not considered. And once the reform developed, and then it was integrated into the Permanent Professional Consultative Commission, and I'm talking about it later on, and then all economic needs were fulfilled. So we took into account, let's say, construction work, catering, agriculture, all the sectors, in order to be as comprehensive as possible in all the areas. So we had 13 industrial sectors that were incorporated. I'm sorry, my charts do not always reveal what I'm saying. So this is our setup in these industries. So we had the coordinator of industrial areas of certain industries. Then we had the focal point of the technical vocation, and then the focal point of TVET. And then we had, for example, tourism, catering. Then we had the Ministry for Tourism, the technical ministry that was involved, and then we had the different areas that were incorporated. And for example, I'm part of the tourism industry, and we have 3 associations that are incorporated in this body, in this committee. And here I have a scheme of the bodies and their functioning. So we have the 13 consultative professional commissions. Then we have the 13 professional sector councils. And here we have technical training teachers, because here the competencies, the skills that are necessary are expressed. And teachers are translating our needs into curricula in order to make the system as efficient as possible. And there are some missions of the professional sectors which I'd like to highlight. I'm not going to repeat all of them, but just the most important ones, and from the industries. So the entire industry needs to be associated to this initiative, and it was also important that the financial funding was mentioned, so everybody was aware of it, and partnerships were to be built, because it wasn't only important to think of policies, but actors had to be together in order to follow the evolution of measures taken. So I don't have the data for the industrial industries, but there were some skills that were mentioned by the teachers that are necessary, for example, for a certain industry. An expert in an industry mentioned skills that were necessary in his sector and in the entire sector of his industry, and that was key. And the expert also needed to know the industry, the economic system, and the vocational training system as a total. And this council had 15 members in total as a maximum, because 2/3 came from the private sector and 1/3 from the public sector. And then we had the National Commission where vocational training was coordinated, and there it was that was the contrary. So we didn't have the practical experts from vocational training. So it was important that in the public sector it was known what was needed in the private sector, and our reform evolved. But we haven't still gone to an active stage. So, as I already mentioned, our mission is to develop the training offer for a professional sector, the creation and updating of curricula, and adapt training to have as competent workers as possible. And here I laid out the system of the foundation of the public and private partnership. So we have the needs that are expressed that are then translated into curricula. Then we go to workshops. We try to stipulate and identify the needs in a special profession, and at the end of the day we come up with a new curriculum, a new vocational training, where we train steering staff. And one aspect of the reform was the implementation and its institutional governance in the public sector. But now we're also focusing on governing the TVET systems, and a decree was adopted in 2018, putting in place a body for the creation, organization and function of the Committee for setting up management bodies to govern vocational training institutions. And this is special for Ivory Coast, because it is important that we start trying out things before using them, and we're using it for the entire system nowadays. So we have the technical viability that is explored. So not all institutions are best equipped. Then it is important that institutions are checked for their economic environment, representativeness of the types of institutions in TVET, and ability to generate additional resources. And this helped to measure that these public educational institutions are in line with the needs in the private sector. And the director of the vocational training sector was not necessarily the manager of the public sector, but once things were put in place, it was important that the public function was in line with the private function. So in order to be nominated, an institution director had to provide a pilot project and set up a performance contract, for example, to train butchers, for example. So what do I want to have achieved in 5 years, 10 years, and in a long-term perspective, to see what is a really institutionalized curriculum in the future that we're heading for. And this is very innovative for us, because our fear was that in different workshops we thought that the functions are not necessary, because the individuals from this private sector were not taken into account, but ministers, work councils and trade unions were listened to, so that everything is settled without any disruption, because we were there also for encounter disruptions. And then we had these 12 members, representatives of the state and 6 of the private sector, and the partnership here helped us to focus on moderators setting up curricula with all the representatives, and at the end we achieved so many progress. So it's 10 o'clock now at Ivory Coast, and I received a mail by someone who is part of the executive committee of the TVET Center, who was designed for the tourism sector, and I have to go to Abidjan to represent this sector. This executive committee will get together in order to start work. So what are the challenges that we are confronted with in view of this reform? So we're very late when it comes to the putting in place of what is laid out in our decree. So certain things don't work in exactly the timeline that was established. And we also have some institutional instability. So it's 4 years that I've participated in the mission. And in these 4 years, we have had 4 different ministers, and they come with different teams, and you have to start all over again. So when I started to work in the reform, the minister was the state minister of social affairs, of occupation, and so on and so forth. So you can see that the portfolio was very vast. And you think if you're doing too many things at the same time, you can't work efficiently. And now I'm working for the Ministry for TVET and technical training.
I've seen that there's a certain level of instability. When the management or the head of a ministry changes, we often find that there are lots of changes in the project too. And we are sometimes bogged down in these changes, and sometimes we can't really work on the objectives that we have established, that we have adopted, because there's been a change at the helm of the ministry. We would like to see some progress. I think that this is not just a matter of TVET. Someone said this morning that if it's only the competent ministry that works on TVET, we might fall short of our objectives. Other competent ministries need to be involved, and they all need to coordinate their efforts. We've seen that sometimes the representatives of the other ministries are lagging behind. They are sometimes making things difficult. That's something we are unhappy about, but we would really like to see some progress here. I would like to wrap up and conclude my presentation today. All in all, we can say that the private sector is quite happy about the different initiatives to coordinate the TVET measures, and we have created a debate about the problems, and we have established the first approaches to find a solution to these problems, even if we cannot yet present a solution to all of the problems today. But at least we have identified the problems. We have a large number of initiatives with various financing partners. We have UN projects. We also have the Millennium Challenge projects. We have various different private and public organizations, and sometimes we carry out various initiatives with one and the same partner, and we would like to bring everything under the same umbrella to have a greater efficiency. The private sector is quite happy with the reform of the TVET sector in spite of the problems that I've mentioned before. And we also work, of course, with the representatives of civil society organizations and the employers' organizations. I would like to thank you very much for listening. And to wrap up, I've tried to come up with a word of thanks in German. I don't know if I'll be happy to pronounce it, but I would like to say Danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for very good presentation. We always talk about involvement of private sector, but how to go about it. It's a very concrete example, very clear way of saying we want to look at paradigm shift from supply-driven towards systems-driven approach. Excellent example. And secondly, on public-private partnerships. I'm sure involving private sector in TVET program will be always challenging in most of developing countries, and Ivory Coast was not an exception. But I would like to compliment you and your colleagues there for doing a great job. Now, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to move to our third presentation. I hope you have a lot of questions, issues, comments. Keep them ready. We'll try to spend last 15-20 minutes on that. So it's my great pleasure to now request Oliver to come and please make a presentation on public sector, the role of government in Germany, for example. Taking migration as one of the disruptions or an opportunity. Let's see how this presentation will come out. Oliver, floor is yours for next 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Olivier, I have to say hi. My name is Oliver. What you just mentioned sounds very much like the work that I'm doing in the German ministry. So I congratulate you for having a debate on the problems, which is not easy in a ministry, and having identified the problems, which is also not always clear. So welcome in the club. I'm going back to Shamal's plea and say, what can we say about the migration issue here in Germany? And I'm very happy to follow you. And I wanted to give you a feeling of disruption, and I thought, what's the opposite of disruption? What can then happen? Personally, I'm a psychologist, and I would say maybe healing is the opposite. Something that I would say, and maybe disruption is if you come from a personal point of view, a crisis. You probably have a book in your bookshelves about growing in crisis, opportunities in crisis. So disruption and healings, I think, is a very nice thought, and I want to go with it on the issue of migration, which has been one of the leading topics in the German politics for the last 3 years. But first of all, a key data from, let's say, an established VET system. I hear about countries who are interested in the VET system and want to establish one. We have an established VET system. And the key reference data for you is that around 770,000 VET opportunities are offered this year. This is the statistical data from the 30th of September of last year, which is the beginning of the new school year in VET. Out of these, around 560,000 were offered by businesses. So the so-called dual system is working on that level, and we have around 420,000 companies who are involved. Germany is not a very big country, so you can imagine that 420,000 businesses include a lot of small businesses, a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. This sounds very good. My minister has just promoted these numbers in the parliament. She was very happy. She said the VET sector is very healthy. And of course, the main parties in the parliament, they applauded. The opposition parties said it's not true, the numbers have gone down, and so on. But I would say the truth is the system is running. We have some challenges. One challenge is the male-female relationship. We have a lot of male TVET students, but not enough females. It may be true that most of the offers that we have are maybe more mechanic, chemical, technology-oriented, but this is an issue. We have no answer to this now. The transition success rate, I'm trying to translate it from a German word, for foreign passport holders, the so-called Ausländer or migrants, is only half of that of German passport holders. So there is an issue about foreigners, foreign youth especially, entering into the VET sector. And to make the picture complete, not everyone who wants to go into the VET sector is actually achieving it. We have around 300,000 youth who are not apt to go into it. So they need a prep course to go into VET. And this is maybe a first idea of saying there's something above VET. I mean, this is a wrong picture, but I'm saying it is university, academic world, and so on. Then you have the VET sector. but there's something underneath it. Some people not apt for it, and the number is growing. Overall, 2 million Germans have no school certificate at all. For the first time, we hit over the 2 million number, and this is also an argument of the opposition parties trying to say the VET system is not integrative enough. Okay, next slide. It's a yearly challenge, so every year we start with a VET year, and you see the numbers look fine if you understand what these numbers mean. 104, which is the upper, does it work? No? Here. This line here is one of the key indicators for us, saying for 100 VET students who are looking for work, we have 105 opportunities in general, nationwide. Does not mean that everyone in North Rhine-Westphalia, the state we're here, has a good opportunity. Mostly these offers are made in South Germany, and we have a lot of people here in West Germany. The mobility is an issue. Is VET where the students are? Or the students are not there where VET is needed? That's an issue that we are dealing with in nationwide here. The next slide. Oops. Oh. Going back, VET is still the main education pillar, so there's a comparison of the academic world and VET. So you see traditionally VET was much higher than academics, and this is changing. So still, VET, if you do the math right, if you take all the foreign students out of the calculations, VET is still slightly a top education pillar for youth, but of course the academics are catching up with us. I go quickly through because this is the next slide. What is the qualifications of VET students? This is going automatically. Someone who's doing magic here, okay? There's one issue that I will not stay too long with it, but it says you have people who could go to university and they are going into VET. This number is growing, and there are people, students who move out of basic schooling, which is the dark blue and the red part, and they are getting less. So originally, VET was a very integrative education pillar. Everyone who wanted to go in could go in. Formally, you don't even need a school certificate to start a VET career. But reality shows that the qualification standards set by the employers are going up and up. So that's a real problem. So this is the German scenario. And now comes the disruption. And the disruption is that beginning in the year 2015, 2016, up to 2018, but with numbers are lower now, we have had around 1.5 million refugees, people come in. And the peak year was 2015, which was really flooding the system. But again, Pradeep, you started saying this was only the numbers of Europe. Maybe in 20 years we have 40 million people waiting on the shores of Africa. So this is a very small number, but it was enough to make our system really turn. The main countries of these refugees are Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Eritrea, and Somalia. Many more, but these are the main countries. And the literacy and the language skills of these refugees were very low. In most cases, very low or non-existent. The problem was for many of them that they come from disrupted family backgrounds. A part of family is here, other part is still in Iran, maybe in Turkey, somewhere on the shores of Africa. And mostly young male people came. So there were more than 50% were 18 years, between 18 and 20 years, which is very young, considering our age standards in Germany. So what is the reaction? What is the healing? Maybe what is the hard learning of the system? the federal ministry. We thought at the beginning, I'm saying it, we were very naive. I have to say, I was also very naive. We were thinking that the capacities, the learning capacities of the refugee group were much higher. And why is this? We initially thought that 1 year of language learning would make them fit for VET, which is absolutely nonsense. But in 2015, I'd say 90% of all the professionals thought that 1 year language learning would make them fit. We also had a romantic feeling about the refugees will save us from our demographic problems. Germany is getting older, a lot of people do not have successors in small businesses. We thought, well, this will help us. But the reality is that for many of the refugees, a VET career over 3 years, which is a very long time if you have other problems to solve in your life, and a meager pay, I call it the VET payment during these 3 years, was not attractive enough to call a lot of people into VET. Then we were very spontaneous in rolling out new projects. We did as an education ministry, the colleagues from the economy ministry did, the other colleagues from the family ministry did. So we have hundreds of refugee programs, and all in parallel. And, of course, the euphoria of the business sector was there in 2015, and they thought that they will have quick, skilled labor available for their businesses, but they had to be frustrated. These hopes were frustrated because many of the apprenticeships that started were not completed. So this is the disruption. We are still in the healing process, I would say. 2018 is a healing year. And with the new government, we were even maybe more realistic. What did we do? First, we tried to speed up the legal processes to define what a refugee is. It's a big issue. You can only stay if you're really fleeing from some, how can I say, war, political problem, and so on. So this was taking years in the past. Right now we have tried to speed up the process up to, let's say, 3/4 of a year. There's a big discussion now nationwide, it's not decided yet, to have one-stop shops. The opposition says it's almost like it's camps for refugees. The Interior Ministry says it's the right place to really process the cases in a quick manner. And we have a big scandal right now, if you read the German news, that, wie sagt man BAMF? How do you say that in German? The responsible agency, it's a sub-agency of the Interior Ministry, has been selling, or at least there is the doubt about that some corruption has been going on in thousands of cases. So this puts in question the whole system, in a way. So, but this is going on as I speak. It's today's news and yesterday's news and will be tomorrow's news. What we have done, the big issue was language learning. So hundreds of thousands of language courses, thousands of language teachers that we have to employ from one day to another. We have now, since last year, we have an integrated language program which leads in 2 to 3 years to a level which we call the B1 level, language level. Hopefully that is enough to start a VET career. Also disputed, some people say B2 language is the minimum. Then we have amended our federal law, so someone who is in VET cannot be deported. It's a big issue. If you're not uncertain if you can stay, who should take you as a VET apprentice? Why should it be attractive to you at all? We, as the Education Ministry, have put that in the federal law. We have some problems with the Interior Ministry in some provinces, but most of the students who start a VET career can stay for 3 years and up to 2 years more. If that is working out, they can stay for longer. If you're not accepted, in many cases the Afghani people have a problem with this. This is one of the main options to stay here. So we have a lot of following right now what is happening in VET. And maybe we have been upscaling our working projects for migrant kids. We tried not to build a parallel world for refugees. We have an issue that migration youth are not fully integrated in the VET system. We did not want to create another problem that there's some sort of rivalry between these groups. So we are upscaling the normal BMBF projects and will not create more. And let's say this is the last point. We have a more realistic view on what is happening. Healing on both sides, I would say that if you come from Afghanistan, you have never visited a school or maybe a Quran school for a year or two, how many years will it take to get a VET certificate? Realistic is 6 years. You have to say that to someone who is 16 years old. Say, you start today, we see each other in 6 years and you have your certificate and then you will start a professional career. It's a long time for someone who has already spent so much time on the journey. But this is where we are right now. Now, my last slide, I think it's my last slide, the present learning and opening challenges. We have had this year 27,000 refugees in regular VET, statistically integrated. I told you we have 1.5 million refugees, half of them younger or in the VET age, so that's only a very small fraction, but they are arriving. That's the good news. They are arriving in the VET system. 10,000 in the traditional dual system. Question that we have, what will happen to those who will not have that perspective? They are either too old, don't have time, need more money, go into black work, and so on. So this is an open question which will be to be solved by this government in the next 2 to 3 years. And how do we open a communication with the refugee community? We have an established Turkish foreign community, we have the Portuguese, the Spanish, all these immigrant communities who are somewhat here for decades already. But who do we talk to if we want to talk with about Afghani problems? There's no partner right now. And we're trying to establish focal points, but I'm sure if we come together in 2 or 3 years, we will have that. And not to forget it, there has been a public trauma on refugees. You said it, Pradeep, the political landscape has been changed in Europe. I would say from the euphoria 3 years ago, we have gone into a deep valley and we're trying to crawl out of this. I'm still very optimistic about it, and I would say we're in the process of healing. I hope these are some issues that are very open. I want to discuss them with you and we have some time for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oliver, I must compliment you. Very objective and very realistic presentation on disruption caused by migration and how TVET program is playing a very important role. In fact, I have lived in Austria for a long time before coming to Bonn, and I was always amazed by Matura program, and most of the high school students not going for higher education but going for technical education. And that was very true for at least these 3 or 4 countries, Germany, Austria, Switzerland and others, like in which I come from, India, and their technical program is a second option. The first option always higher education. But here, vocational program and higher education on the same footing, depending on your aptitude and what you want to do with your life. And so I feel Germany is a very good example. Here where integration of migration and TVET program, how they're going together. Thank you so much for raising challenges, but I was really intrigued by your word healing. It's a very interesting way of, spiritual way of, other way of looking at disruption caused by migration. So colleagues, I could, but not hear Oliver and other presentations. We spend more time listening to them than I envisaged for our questions, but nevertheless, I think we can indulge for another 10 to 15 minutes of comments and questions. Please be ready with your questions or comments to any panelist, or you would like to share from your experience something similar happening in your country. My only request is be brief, introduce yourself so that we can take note of that. Maybe gentlemen there and there. Maybe please use your mic. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Rodrigo Núñez. I'm from Chile, from UNESCO-UNEVOC Center. And I have a question. Thank you everyone for your presentations. But I have a specific question for Oliver. First of all, congratulations for what you are doing here with the refugees and migrants in Germany. In Chile, we don't have as many immigrants as you have here. We have few, but it's becoming a problem for the country. So when you said, I have two questions. When you said that nobody that is in VET system cannot be deported, this is just for the VET system, or it is for all the educational system? And the other question is that when you are offering a program to the refugees, you just offer the programs and wait for them to enroll, or you go where they are in order to be sure that they are going to be enrolled in the programs you are offering? Thank you.
Sure. We'll take 2 or 3 other questions, and then I will request panelists to really recommend. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Bonjour, Isabelle Lemouillour du
Isabelle Lemouillour from the Institute for Professional Education. A question to Mr. Usu. You started with your presentation with the lack of orientation between labor market and the professional vocation system, and one solution that you mentioned was the agreement on performance for enterprises. And I'm asking myself, what is the role of enterprises concerning the performance criteria that you may have set up? Thank you.
We can take one more question before we request the panelists. Any other comment or question at this stage? Yes, please.
My name is Giovanni Crisona. I represent a sector skill network in advanced manufacturing. And we are discussing a very hot topic in the last months concerning the ethical skills that we want that has to be included in the learning pathways. This is in relation to the technological skills that make people able to build any weapon with a simple 3D printer. So this is related to the very specific area of the VET, because we are talking about advanced manufacturing. But anyway, I would like to know if this topic of the ethical skills in any way is treated in your learning pathway. When you say we include migrants in the VET, we have a large offer of VET solutions for them. But there is any reflection at the government level concerning the need to include ethic skills as a target of the final result? It's clear? Yeah,
thank you so much. I think we have excellent 3 questions. On the third question, when Oliver can answer that, but I will also request our colleague from Canada, she could, Denise can also look at that, because it will be very good to see when you talk about advanced manufacturing, especially Industry 4.0, where we really linking higher education, vocation, and research all together. So let me start with Oliver from the first question. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to answer the question from Chile. There is, to understand the system, I don't make it very long. We do not have an how can I say, a migration law, labor migration law. So all the migrants who are coming under the asylum law. So the procedure is to prove whether they are asylum seekers or not, or rightfully asylum seekers or not. So you have someone who is in the process. These people have never had any working rights. We have opened this up. You come here, you say, I need asylum. You have first opportunities, even in VET. But as long as the process goes on, at one point there comes a decision. There's a committee, they hear your case, they think it's right, it's logic, and then they will say, you're rightfully accepted here, you can stay. For a lot of people, they say, you can't stay because your story is not logic, we don't believe what you say, your country is safe in general, and so on. For those people, they get a letter saying, you have to leave Germany within 2 weeks. Okay? And if you are in this process, you go into a VET opportunity, the company has an interest that you stay because they invest in you. So we have given them the security to say, it doesn't matter what comes out of the process, this young boy or this young girl can stay. First, to finish the VET course, and second, for another 2 years, so you can work with that person. And if that works well, they get a stamp and they can stay forever. Okay? But that wasn't there. So this is, let's say, part of the healing process, because a lot of people were frustrated about it. Second, what about the VET information? A lot of these young boys, mostly boys, do not understand what German VET is. They have no clue what it is. If they learn mechanics, they learn it on the streets in Afghanistan. They learn it with an uncle, they look what he does and they repeat it. What we do is high-tech electronic mechanics with Porsche, okay? So for them, it's a lot of learning. So, and for them, maybe it would be a university equivalent. But we are trying hard to persuade on this case, sometimes with success, many times without success. The third question, ethical questions, this is included in the language course. And not under our jurisdiction, but under the Interior Ministry. They say we give you 900 hours of language learning, and is it 60 or 100 hours of cultural learning. And with this cultural learning, they learn what are the German states, what's the name of the president, some history, and maybe some ethical. You're right, we should include it. Our business community is more occupied about what is punctuality, what is cleanness, what is security learning. In many areas, security is an issue. If you don't understand, if you don't have a sense that something might fall down or it's a chemical, this is the issues that we're talking. On top comes now ethical views. But we don't have anything formalized on this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Mr. Osu, Olivier, please.
Merci. La question.
Thank you. The question was, what is the situation, the role of enterprises when it comes to vocational training? And here we have to go back to the fact that on enterprise level, we are not necessarily interlinked with performance level. And now we have performance contracts that include the enterprise that plays a role in the beginning and in the end of the process. So we are representatives of the management committee, but when it comes to putting in place the project, the project leader will focus on a certain sector and mobilize our members to work with apprentices and to provide the instruments to achieve apprenticeship goals. We don't want to recruit just for the sake of it. And if certain performance criteria are not achieved, we will have to look for a different recruitment scheme. So the enterprise will select candidates, but also in the process, the enterprise will play a role, because the enterprise will then mobilize people to work on the achievement of the results. I hope I could answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Now I'll request Denise to really give her example from Canada, and especially on the ethical issue, if possible.
Yeah, and I have something for the person that had the questions with respect to the role of the industry. So on the ethical aspect, in Canada, the way it works is that ethics is part of your professionalism as an individual, so it influences your behavior. That's why when they start, those that have a uniform, whether it's police officer, nurses, whether it is in aesthetics, they already start to wear the uniform on the first or second day, depending if they went to buy their new suit. And this professionalism comes with the behavior, because everybody knows, oh, that's the future police, and look at this. So it comes with responsibility when you wear the uniform. It comes with entrepreneurship skills. It comes with excellence of service also. It comes with punctuality that you talked about. It comes with sustainability. So ethics is part of the teaching. It's also a big part of the applied research because that's an important aspect. With respect to the role of the industry in Canada, the way it works, although we don't have a national Ministry of Education and we have 13 different jurisdictions, there is some things that are common. One of them is that every single program that is taught has what we call a PAC. A PAC is a Program Advisory Committee. In Quebec, it has another name, but it's the same thing. And that Program Advisory Committee is made up of people from the community, from the industry, and they literally influence the curriculum, they influence the type of internship, the competencies that you are to acquire, the equipment even that is being used, and so on.
Thank you very much, Denise. Excellent comments, excellent questions. Colleagues, friends, we are coming to an end to this wonderful session. I would like to request you to give a round of applause to all three panelists. They covered three important pillars: institutional, private sector, public sector, government. I was very happy that we are connecting the dots here. Let me take this opportunity once again to thank Shamal, my professional colleague, and of course a good friend, for inviting me for this session to moderate and see how we can link up different dots here: SDGs, climate action, and skills, vocational training, and how it is fitting in the overall global development architecture. With these words, once again, I thank you for your listening to this wonderful presentation. I'm sure some of the points will be captured in the outcome summary of this session. Only 3 points I would like to say that when I want to conclude this session, we are talking about here through TVET, people, planet, and partnerships. And our partnerships, I always would like to quote something which I learned in Africa when I started working in 2001. Alone you go fast, together you go far. So with TVET program, we would like to go far. And for this partnership of everybody present here is very critical. Thank you very much for your kind attention.